It was a scorching Thursday afternoon in the small town of Ridgeview. The sun hung high, casting harsh shadows over the dilapidated precinct building where Officer Jake Mitchell leaned against his patrol car, lazily chatting with his partner, Officer Chris Harris. The heat was unbearable, but it wasn't just the temperature that was making Jake irritable. He was restless, fed up with the same routine day after day. Things at the precinct had been quiet for months, and it was beginning to wear on him. It was then that a man appeared at the entrance of the precinct. The man looked out of place. His clothes were simple, worn jeans and a plain shirt, and his unshaven face gave him an air of ruggedness. His expression was unreadable, and he moved slowly, taking in the precinct's surroundings as though he didn't belong there. "Hey, look at this guy," Chris muttered, nudging Jake. "What do you think he's doing here?" Jake glanced up, sizing the man up with a sneer. "Probably lost," he said dismissively before turning back to his conversation. They had seen countless people wander in and out of the precinct over the years, troubled souls, drifters, and the occasional protester, but something about this man felt different. The stranger didn't seem fazed by the officer's stares, and without hesitating, he pushed through the front door of the precinct. "Hey," Jake called out, his tone sharp. "You can't just walk in there without permission." The man turned around slowly, his eyes meeting Jake's. The air between them felt charged, though neither man spoke for a moment. Finally, the stranger spoke in a calm, collected voice. "I'm just looking for the break room. I've been on my feet all day." Jake smirked, rolling his eyes. "We don't need your kind here. This is a police station, not some shelter for people like you." Without another word, Jake pushed past his partner and made his way inside the precinct, following the man who seemed completely unbothered by the remark. He wasn't sure why, but something about the encounter rubbed him the wrong way. As the stranger stepped into the break room, Jake followed, feeling a strange sense of superiority. He didn't care who this man was. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was there, and Jake couldn't let someone like him feel at home in a place like this. And then, before anyone could react, Jake did something he would regret. With a sudden motion, he stepped up to the man, his hand reaching out to shove him aside. But in a moment of frustration, Jake spat right in the man's face. The entire room fell silent. The man didn't flinch. His gaze didn't waver. He stood perfectly still as the spit slid down his cheek, a faint sheen of anger flashing in his eyes. There was a collective gasp from the officers in the break room, but they stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Jake's chest swelled with pride, believing he had shown the stranger his place. But then, something unexpected happened. The man reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a handkerchief, and wiped his face with deliberate care. Jake smirked, waiting for some sort of apology or reaction. But instead, the man looked him straight in the eye, his voice calm yet firm. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" Jake opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the intercom crackled overhead, signaling the start of the morning briefing. Without saying another word, the man turned and walked down the hall, his back straight, his movements deliberate. Jake watched him leave, but a sinking feeling began to churn in his stomach. This encounter felt off. There was something more to this man than he realized. Later that day, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He tried to go through the motions, catching up on paperwork, answering routine calls, but his mind kept drifting back to the man he'd spat on. Who was he? Why had he been so calm? It was like he'd known something Jake didn't. Around 3 p.m., the precinct received an unexpected visit from the police commissioner, an official usually seen only at the most significant meetings. The officers, including Jake, gathered in the briefing room, exchanging uneasy glances. The commissioner was a serious man, a career officer with a strict reputation. He stood at the front, scanning the room with a hard stare. Behind him, a tall, well-dressed man stood with a briefcase in hand. The man looked strangely familiar to Jake, but he couldn't place where he'd seen him before. "Good afternoon, everyone," the commissioner began, his tone grave. "I have some important news. Today, Ridgeview Police Department has a new leader." The officers exchanged puzzled glances. Was this some sort of joke? Effective immediately, the commissioner continued, "Our new chief of police has arrived. Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Chief Sam Walker." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but what caught him off guard was the man standing next to the commissioner, the very same man he had encountered earlier that morning in the precinct. The man who had been so calm despite Jake's aggression. The room fell into stunned silence as Chief Walker gave a brief nod to the officers. He wasn't wearing a police uniform, but his confident posture, sharp eyes, and the way he carried himself suggested he was no stranger to authority. Jake's mouth went dry. This couldn't be happening. The commissioner motioned toward Jake. "Officer Mitchell, if you'd step forward." Jake took a hesitant step, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes, sir," he stammered, his mind racing. "Do you remember this man?" the commissioner asked, his voice almost too calm. "Sam Walker, our new chief." Jake's face flushed crimson as he realized what was happening. The man he had spat on earlier, he was the new chief? His stomach twisted with a combination of embarrassment and dread. This wasn't just any officer or civilian. This was someone who held the highest rank in the department now. Jake's mind raced to make sense of what had just unfolded. Chief Walker stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Jake's face. "Officer Mitchell," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried, "I believe we had an unpleasant encounter earlier today." Jake couldn't meet his eyes. He felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him, and the weight of his actions came crashing down. He'd been reckless, judgmental, and unprofessional, and now, it seemed, he was paying the price. The other officers in the room seemed to shrink back, the tension palpable. They all knew what had happened. They were witnessing the fallout. "I'd like to think that every person deserves respect, regardless of their appearance or background," Chief Walker continued, his voice even but firm. "But I can understand that not everyone agrees with that philosophy." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides, fighting the urge to apologize, to say something that would ease the tension. But he knew it was too late for apologies. The damage had already been done. "And as for you," Chief Walker said, turning his attention to the commissioner, "I think it's time we discuss the future of this department." His tone left no room for argument. It was clear that Chief Walker was in complete control, despite his calm demeanor. Jake stood frozen, his breath shallow. He didn't know what the next step would be, but one thing was certain. The reality of his actions had just hit him like a ton of bricks, and now he would have to live with the consequences. The rest of the meeting continued, but Jake barely heard a word. His mind was focused on one thing. How would Chief Walker handle the situation? Would this cost him his job? Would the entire department turn against him? In the back of his mind, Jake couldn't help but wonder if this would be the beginning of his downfall, or if, somehow, he could salvage the mess he created. All he knew was that this moment, this unthinkable encounter, had changed everything. The days that followed felt like an endless blur of uncertainty for Jake. The initial shock of meeting Chief Sam Walker had worn off, but the weight of what he had done lingered. He couldn't stop replaying the moment he had spit on the new chief in his mind, each time the image of Walker's calm, steady gaze making Jake feel more like a fool. The other officers in the precinct had been whispering behind his back, and Jake knew it was only a matter of time before he would face serious consequences. Yet, Chief Walker hadn't taken immediate action. Despite the disrespect Jake had shown him, he hadn't gone straight to the commissioner to have him fired or demoted. Instead, The chief continued to show up at the precinct daily, overseeing operations as if nothing had happened, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. One afternoon, a week after their initial meeting, Chief Walker approached Jake at his desk. The other officers in the room pretended not to notice, but the tension in the air was thick. "Officer Mitchell," Chief Walker said, his voice measured but not unkind. "Can I have a word?" Jake's heart raced, but he stood up without hesitation, walking toward the chief's office. Once inside, Walker motioned for him to sit. The room felt unnervingly quiet, and Jake had no idea what was coming next. "I'll be honest with you, Mitchell," Chief Walker began, leaning back in his chair. "When I first arrived, I didn't know how you'd react to me being here. And after our little encounter, I thought about what kind of officer you were and what kind of person you are." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had no idea what to expect, but the way the chief was speaking made him feel like he was about to receive a lecture, if not a reprimand. "You've made a mistake. There's no denying that," Walker continued, his voice still calm. "But mistakes don't define us, unless we let them. What matters is what we choose to do next." Jake felt a mixture of relief and confusion. He'd been expecting a harsh punishment, not this level-headed approach. I'm sorry for what I did, Chief. I shouldn't have acted the way I did. I can't undo it, but I regret it." Walker nodded slowly. "I'm glad to hear that, Mitchell. Apologizing is important, but actions speak louder than words. I want to see how you move forward from this, how you choose to learn from your mistake." Jake wasn't sure what he meant, but he listened intently as Walker continued. "I've seen how you've been handling yourself since that day. I've noticed you've been more focused, more determined, even more respectful to your fellow officers. You've learned, and I respect that." Jake's shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe there was a chance for redemption after all. Walker paused, then gave a small smile. "I've been in this job long enough to know that people can change, but they need the chance to prove it. I'm giving you that chance." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. It felt like a second chance, something he hadn't expected after his blatant disrespect for the chief. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, and more than that, a desire to prove himself worthy of the opportunity Walker was giving him. "You're not off the hook," Walker added, his tone becoming more serious again. "But you're on a path now. What happens next depends entirely on you." Jake stood up, his heart swelling with determination. "Thank you, Chief. I won't let you down." Walker's eyes flickered with a hint of approval. "I believe you won't. Now let's get back to work." As Jake left the office, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just working under the chief anymore, he was working alongside him. Jake knew he had a long road ahead to rebuild his reputation, but he also knew that this moment was a turning point. Over the next few months, Jake worked tirelessly to prove himself. He showed up early, stayed late, and always gave his best effort. It wasn't easy, especially with the whispers and sideways glances from some of his colleagues, but Jake remained focused. The chief kept an eye on him, offering advice and feedback when needed, but never pushing him too hard. He gave Jake space to grow. And grow he did. The officers who had once doubted him began to respect him again, and Jake began to understand the true meaning of leadership. It wasn't about authority or titles. It was about integrity, humility, and the willingness to admit when you've made a mistake and work to make things right. Months later, as Jake stood beside Chief Walker during a department ceremony, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had come a long way from the officer who had spat on the chief of police. Now he was a part of something bigger, something he could respect and believe in. Chief Walker caught his eye and gave him a slight nod, as if silently acknowledging how far Jake had come. Jake's journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally on the right path.